You're not going to believe how I got this piece of wood. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I've got a really special piece of cedar. This is a specific species of cedar and I'll tell you more about that as we go. This has a really tight grain in it. It's a beautiful looking piece. It's relatively dry and it's in great shape. I don't see any cracks or anything on it. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to do a turning that's going to include the pith. Rarely do we do this because the pith usually holds a lot of tension and we like to slice the side grain mounted bowls right at the pith to release that tension so there's not so much stress on the wood. But in this case, this chunk of wood looks pretty stable and I'm going to include the pith in this turning. So as I turn this, I'm going to tell you the whole story about how I acquired this little chunk of wood. So I'm going to get this on the lathe and we'll get started.
Balance is really important when we're doing a live edge or a natural edge turning. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to find the balanced center, and what I'm looking for is the equal distance from the pith out to the sides, and I'm finding it right about here. So that's looking pretty good. So this is going to be the horizontal axis and this will be the vertical axis for this piece, and this is going to be the top of the bowl. I'm just going to draw that line there so I have that as a reference. You can see how it's balanced in that particular position. And that'll be the foot of the bowl right down here. Now I need to center it up, make sure I center this on the lathe as well, because if I don't center this, I'm going to cut away extra material and we don't want that. So this is about 5 inches wide. So using those marks I made as a guide, I'm going to mount this to the lathe using a drive center and the tailstock. I'm going to bring that up. Now this piece has a really rough texture. This isn't the bark of the tree, but it's the outside texture, and it is very coarse and bumpy. So that's going to be a little bit of an issue I'm going to need to address initially. But what I like to do is start curving this and just get a sense of the shape and determine how balanced this is. That's another advantage of having this between the drive center and the tailstock. If I start turning and decide, oh wait, this isn't as balanced as it could be, I can make a minor adjustment very easily. If I mounted this to a faceplate or other means, it's not quite as easy to adjust. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to address this bottom area. What I need is I need a really good flat surface to create the tenon and the shoulder. And I like to have a good flat surface where the tailstock is connecting. And right now, it's not connected to a very flat surface. So I'm going to level this out. Just taking my time making a push cut here using my 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. So I was going through viewer emails, which I do a lot. There's a ton of emails and comments that I get, and I go through these on a regular basis. And I was responding to a question that someone had sent to me about finishes, and they were asking about the finish that they were using. I'm going to get this little nub off of here out of the way so that I've got a good flat connection with the tailstock. And I got this letter that was asking about what finish do I recommend for a particular turning. And the gentleman said that he was using two species of wood, and one of the species was Bermuda Cedar. And I thought, well, that's really weird. I bet that's got to be coming from Bermuda. And then I thought, well, where is this person? So I responded and I wrote back and I answered the question about the finish. And I said, by the way, where exactly are you? And he responded that he's in Bermuda, because obviously it makes sense that you have Bermuda Cedar in Bermuda. And then he proceeded to say, well, I can bring you a piece of this Bermuda Cedar. I'm coming to the United States next year and maybe we can meet. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. But then I responded to him and I said, well, you're not going to believe this. So what I'm looking for right here is I'm looking at those pith ends and I'm making sure that those are still pretty balanced. And I'm feeling pretty good about the balance of this. They're not perfectly lined up, but it's balanced very well. So I'm going to go ahead and mark for the tenon, and I'll create the tenon and shoulder and get that portion of the bowl taken care of. Just checking that measurement there. So I wrote him back and I said, you're not going to believe this. I'm going to be in Bermuda next week. My wife and I had planned on traveling to Bermuda on a short vacation for quite some time. And what were the odds of this person contacting me right before we actually went there? This is one of those moments where you have to wonder, what's really going on? How could that possibly have happened? It's just, is it a coincidence? Is it something else? It's very interesting. So, long story short, I was able to meet Gavin Wilson in Bermuda, and we had a great chat. We sat down for a while and talked about wood turning, and Gavin's a super nice guy and very, very, very pleasant to spend some time with. And he gave me this chunk of Bermuda cedar. And interestingly enough, we saw tons of these trees on the island, and we saw lots of other woodworkers using this species. And I got to tell you, this wood turns beautifully. It's a very dense, tight grain and has a really nice finish to it and a nice look. And I could see why so many woodworkers would use this. He was mentioning that this is related to the Virginia cedar. And I'm not familiar with Virginia cedar, but maybe somebody out there knows Virginia cedar pretty well. And I don't know if it has a tight grain like this, but it's a really nice piece to turn. So what I'm doing here is I'm making the top edge of the live edge or natural edge bowl. And I really want to make sure those top ingrain fibers, as I'm balancing out both the sides here, I still have more to take away on that side. I want to make sure that those ingrain fibers along this top edge don't get torn out. So I'm reversing the grain cut because we're at about a 90-degree angle. Plus, I want to take that top lip and turn it inward just a little bit. So this is a slightly closed rim bowl. That's just a design preference of mine. You can see how it's turning inward right there. I like that look because it feels closed. It follows the curve of the bowl a little bit more. I see some of the bowls will have the side wings will come almost straight up. I'm not a big fan of that. I either like it to be curved outward or curved continuous like this. So you're seeing part of a continuous circle. Now I do have a little bit of a high spot there. Instead of doing a push cut, I will do a shear scrape with that. And I also need to dress the bottom by the foot. The shoulder right now is going to become the foot of this bowl. And what I want to do is I want to define that shape right there where the two portions are blending together. I want to make sure that I get the curve and the bottom of that foot designed exactly the way I like. So I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge here, and I'm going to really refine that inside corner and that edge and the angle on the foot. And there you can see I put the angle on the foot, and now I'm going to come back in with a shear scrape, and I'm going to just delicately refine that bottom edge so that it blends right in and just goes right down into the foot. Here you can see the shear scrape, and I've got a video all about the shear scrape. You're going to want to check that out. It's probably the best way to make these very minor refinements, especially compared to the push cut. You really don't want to be doing push cuts for something that delicate. So I'm going to clean up the tenon and get this ready. I'm seeing a little area there that I want to refine just a touch more. This is the time to take care of that. You see this very light shear scrape. Okay, so I'm going to reverse this now, and I'm going to get this mounted in the 4-jaw chuck. But before I do that, because this is a softer wood, I don't want to take a chance with that tenon popping off. So what I do is I use some super thin CA, and I apply that all along the base of the tenon where the tenon's connecting to the shoulder, because that's the area that most likely will shear off with a soft wood. I have no idea how I know that. I've never sheared off a tenon before. I'm kidding. I've sheared off many tenons. As a matter of fact, I did one not that long ago. So I have that fresh in my mind, and I don't want that to happen again. So I used the accelerator to dry that CA quickly. And that's just going to give me a little extra insurance when I'm turning this. But I still want to make light cuts. I don't want to get too aggressive here because I can still pop that tenon off. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to level off some of this rough top surface so that I'm working with a more even area. I'm just making some light passes here across the top, and then I'm going to start working down the side wall like I like doing. You want to keep your tools really sharp so you're getting nice clean cuts and you're not getting catches, especially at this point. Any catches at this point can be devastating to that tenon and pop it right off. So I wanted to show you this point of view. This is tricky for me to film because I'm actually looking around the camera to try to get this, but it's really important because I want to share this with you guys. What I'm doing is I'm lining up the bevel of the bowl gouge with the outside profile of the outside shape of the bowl. And I'm making sure that the bevel stays parallel to that at all times.
Hey, if you like this video, you could really help me out by clicking the like button. Thank you.
I love showing this angle because you can really see what's going on, especially with a live edge, natural edge bowl like this, because you get that gap and you can actually see the bowl gouge working in there. I'm also getting flashbacks to a bowl incident that I had not that long ago. So I'm going to take it easy here with these passes. I'm not going to get too aggressive. I don't want to get too overly aggressive and put extra stress on that tenon, because tenons do have a tendency to break. So I'm going back out to that wall and making sure that I've got the wall thickness exactly where I want it. And I'm sneaking up. So the bottom portion right here is still a little too thick. This area is about the last time I'm going to cut here. I'm going to make a single pass down. But you can see the wall thickness getting a little bit thicker. That's because there's more material there. This is the pattern you want to keep all the way down the inside wall. You match the previous wall thickness and then take away a little bit material below that area and then gradually remove that material until it too matches the wall thickness. And then you remove a little bit of this center mass and then continue down that wall. You see how it's still thicker there, but I'm getting closer to matching up the previous wall thickness. The other thing you want to do is you want to stop frequently and check this, because you don't want to take it too far. If you go too far, at this point, you don't want to go back up on those walls and try to thin them out anymore. Look at that wood grain. Look how tight that is. It's just a beautiful, beautiful species. There were all sorts of different things in the gift shops and that made with this Bermuda cedar. And it's funny because I think about it and I don't think most of the shops were making a big deal explaining this is a Bermuda species, but it's kind of neat. They have a unique tree species there. Anywhere where you have an isolated location or a destination where it's difficult to get to, there's a high likelihood that you're going to have unique species whether it's plants or animals. And this is one of those cases. This most likely derived from a different cedar from who knows where originally, and then developed into what it did on this island over the course of thousands of years. And it now has its own specific characteristics that make it its own species, making it different than other cedars. This particular bowl design is really letting us see down in there quite well from this top view. And this is where I like to keep my point of view as well. I'm not bending over looking down into the bowl because I have no idea where the wall is, or rather where my bowl gouge is in relationship to the wall if I'm looking down in through the end of the bowl. Instead, if I stand upright and I'm looking down like I am now, I have a better chance of lining the bowl gouge up properly with the exterior wall. And because this is slightly closed rim, it captures all of those shavings. Even with those great big sides missing, it still captures those shavings. So I'm going to work this section down so that it matches the same wall thickness. If you ever get a chance to go to Bermuda, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful island. It's very well established. It was established in the 1600s. It's got an incredible history and just a gorgeous place to visit. And be sure to check out the Bermuda Cedar trees when you're there too. It's pretty amazing. They're everywhere. You can't miss them. And I thank Gavin for his hospitality and taking time out to meet with me and for this little chunk of wood. And we had a great conversation. It was a lot of fun. And this wood is just beautiful to turn. It's very dense. It's a softer wood, but it's very dense, tightly grained, just ideal for turning. So if you're watching this, Gavin, I would scoop up as much of this as you possibly can get. He was explaining they get a lot that comes down during hurricanes and that, which seems pretty obvious. We don't want any of this to go to waste. And you saw this chunk. It wasn't a huge piece, but yet it's going to yield a really pretty bowl from a relatively small diameter piece. This is what I highly recommend to everybody, is that keep an eye out in your neighborhoods, because these smaller trees, a lot of times landscapers will plant really interesting, unique trees just to make it a statement in somebody's yard. And those trees might not be native, or they might not be something that you usually see, but occasionally they need to be trimmed up or taken out, or maybe even come down after storm damage. And they're easy to overlook because the limbs aren't huge, and they're usually piled up in a big, mess of debris and leaves and that, so it's easy to overlook them. But take a look and see if there's anything laying in the ditch when you're out and about, because there can be some really beautiful species of wood that you can turn that really get overlooked. So I'm going to take my time and sand through the different grits. I'm going to sand this up to 320. I'm starting at 180 because this is such a nice dense wood, and it cuts so well with the bowl gouge. That's the other huge advantage of the bowl gouge versus a scraper, is that it's cutting these end grain fibers and not scraping them or ripping them out. So I don't have torn out end grain. So sanding this, it looks a little aggressive there, but I'm sanding with just the side of the bowl, or side of the sander rather. So I'm going to reverse this in the lathe now. I'm going to use a jam chuck. It's a simple little scrap piece of camphor that I'm using of a jam chuck, and it's not quite centered up. So I'm just going to take a moment and cut a new edge on this. If you notice, I make the front of this rather blunt, and the reason for that is I need more surface area gripping the center of that bowl. If I made that pointed, only that little point is going to be contacting the inside of the bowl, and I don't want that. Now, we had the mark from the tailstock at the beginning. We reutilized that, and guess what? The bowl is perfectly centered right now. and it's easy to line up. So I'm going to use my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm going to take away the tenon and then shape the foot of this bowl. I'm going to true up and flatten the bottom of the foot, and then I'm going to remove a little bit of the material in the middle of the foot as well. I switched over to my spindle detail gouge. Just take your time here, and I want to make that inside curve, that concave curve, continuous. Then I'll thin out this little nub, and then I'll just turn that and sever it from the lathe. Now, if you're not comfortable doing this, you could stop here and then just cut that nub off. What I like to do is I come in with a sharp spindle detail gouge, apply pressure, and turn the lathe off, and then it will cut right through that nub. And then I'll just do a little hand sanding on the bottom of that foot, and we'll get ready for finish. Now I'm applying tried and true Danish oil. This is pure linseed, boiled linseed oil, and nothing else. And the reason I'm using this is it has the ability to penetrate very easily into the wood. This wood is relatively tight grained. The main surface of the wood isn't the issue. It's the bark edge that I really want this to soak into, because it's going to be a little tricky getting down in there. But because it saturates so well, it gets down into that bark really easily. Now I'll apply a couple coats of this. You want to apply it thin, and then make sure that you remove any excess immediately, because you don't want this to build up. It will get gummy. And there's the final piece. This turned out gorgeous for such a small, basic little piece of wood. I think this turning just turned out incredible. I'm very happy with it, and thanks again to Gavin for providing this.
Well, here it is. I think it turned out pretty cool, and I love the way this bark is revealed and there's a negative space behind that. It just turned out really cool. Now, I know there's probably a lot of you out there going, oh, it's so dark. Why is it so dark? Well, unfortunately, that's the nature of pretty much all finishes. A softer wood like this cedar with pretty much any finish is going to go dark like this. The only option would be a water-based varnish, possibly, but even that is going to darken this just a little bit. And then on top of that, if that varnish doesn't darken the wood, time and ultraviolet light will darken the wood. So it is going to become darker over time. There's really no way around that. What I like about the Danish oil is it replicates the finish of the wood, or the natural feel of the wood, without giving it that film protection. Like, that's what a varnish does. A varnish is a film that's on top, and it's problematic in that if you need to go back and touch it up, you can't sand out varnish and then just touch up that area without leaving evidence that you were there, because there's going to be an edge there. So oil is really nice. I will be applying several coats of Danish oil to this to make sure it's good and saturated and penetrated. The other advantage of the Danish oil is it gets down into these bark grooves. I haven't gotten all of them yet, but the next coat will definitely get all of those. Just want to make sure you put those coats on very thin and wipe any excess off almost immediately, so that you don't get any sticky residue on the surface because of the Danish oil. You definitely don't want that. All in all, I'm really pleased with this. I'm still blown away about how I acquired this piece of wood. It's just one of those things you think, is that a coincidence, or is there something else in play here? It's pretty interesting to be able to travel hundreds of miles away from home and see something like this and meet somebody. And I know that there are tons of other people out there all around the world, because you guys write to me and I like writing back to you and that. And it would be so cool if we just effortlessly ran into each other like that. But I don't know if it's quite that simple. But there again, who knows what tomorrow brings? I had no idea I was going to be getting this little piece of wood right before I did. So who knows? Again, we just got to get up each day and count our blessings and do our best and have fun with what we have available. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, please, you could do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. And when you click the like button, it helps the video, helps my channel, helps everything out, and I greatly appreciate you taking just a second to help me out with that. Thank you. And be sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribing. Check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything about, what could possibly be on that website? Oh yeah, everything about turning wood bowls. It's pretty simple. And I have courses there. My courses are set up to help you learn how to turn wood bowls like this very quickly. I take all of the guesswork and all of the lengthy trial and error out of learning how to turn pieces like this. So you're going to want to check out those courses. Go over to my website, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time, happy turning.